When we talk about comfort food, it's hard to beat soup. Some people call them a warm hug inside a bowl, and I couldn't agree more. Noodle soups, though, should be in a category of their own. They just seem to hit different, from your Japanese ramen to your Vietnamese pho. We can't talk about beef noodle soup without mentioning Taiwanese beef noodle soup. So today, I am so excited to be talking to Angel Wong, all the way from Seattle. She has an amazing YouTube channel, I'm actually looking at it now, where she shows you how to cook beautiful, home-cooked Taiwanese dishes. I salivate just looking at it, and I'm sure you're gonna love her recipes. How did you learn to cook? Was it something that was passed down from a parent, or did you just fall into it and started really getting and falling in love with it?
Yeah, so my grandma pretty much raised me, and she cooked for me all the time, and so I would just, as I kind of grew up, I would start helping her, and I learned how to cook from her, and it's been great because I love the food that she cooks. I'm Taiwanese American, and she makes a lot of Taiwanese dishes, and so that's how I learned, and then I kind of want to keep the recipes alive and just as many as I can and share them with the world.
Is that level of authenticity and flavor something that you can find in Seattle, or do you feel it's something that you can recreate at home?
Oh my gosh, the food scene in Taiwan is so amazing. You know, they have night markets there, and we don't have that here in Seattle. Rarely here in the US, but night market food, especially Taiwanese night market food, I think I'm impartial to it, is amazing and delicious. Everybody has their own kind of specialties and their family recipes, and it just tastes amazing. And so really, like here, there are some really good restaurants here that sell Taiwanese food and serve Taiwanese food that's authentic, but it's just not the same, and so I really try and recreate those recipes and flavors on my channel.
For you, does beef noodle soup hold any special kind of place in your heart? Is it something that you grew up eating?
It is something that I grew up eating, and for me, I love soup, and it's just very comforting on a day where you're having a bad day, and the soup is just very comforting. And so my uncle actually passed down this recipe to me. This is his beef noodle soup recipe, and it's just a very comforting soup, and it's delicious with lots of flavors and lots of depth. I am using beef shank, but you could also use beef tendon as well.
So it's like a parboil, just to kind of clean it, right?
Right, just to clean the meat. Yeah, so here I'm using quite a few spices. I've got a half cinnamon stick. We've got some dried chilies to give it a little bit of kick. Now, there's two types of beef noodle soup that you can make. One is spicy and one is not spicy. I personally like the spicy one, so here I've added some dried chilies. We've got some Sichuan peppercorns. We've got some fennel, cloves, and some star anise, of course. You know, I've only made this the one way, and beef noodle soup, to be honest, always has a very kind of unique flavor to it, almost like the 5-spice flavor. So I think for a lot of traditional Taiwanese beef noodle soup, you're going to be using these very similar spices. And here I'm just kind of lightly toasting the spices just to bring the fragrance out. And here I'm just cutting up some onions, some basic vegetables for the broth of the soup. I'm going to add a couple slices of ginger to it, as well as garlic. So the first thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to saute kind of lightly and brown the meat along with the onions. Just give it a little bit of brown. You can do this in the same pot. I highly recommend it. Then put the vegetables in, and we're going to start adding the spices, and along with that, some beef broth. And we're starting with beef broth here just to kind of give it some extra flavor to the soup. Then we've got our soy sauce here. And we're going to let that simmer for about 1.5 to 2 hours, just until the meat is just very tender. You can also use a pressure cooker or a slow cooker if you want as well. I prefer my meat more just tender, and then if you have the option of using beef tendon as well, so it's all really depends on your texture. Now, one of the things I like to do is add some vegetables. So I'm going to just kind of blanch some bok choy and cook some noodles. You can use frozen noodles, fresh noodles, thin knife cut. I'm using kind of some basic thin noodles here.
And these are just wheat flour noodles.
Wheat flour noodles, yes. Now, once the soup is ready, you can just kind of tell by taking the meat out a little bit. I usually like to test a little bit with my chopstick or just take a bite and then kind of plate everything together. Got some noodles, some bok choy, the meat, and the soup broth, which should smell amazing by now if you're doing this in your kitchen. And on the top, I've got we call it suan cai, which is like a pickled mustard green that we put on top. And you can also serve it with some sliced chilies and cilantro.
That looks so good.
It's amazing, it's delicious.
Okay, so the dish I'm going to show you today is called Kinalas. It's from the Bicol region, which is one of my favorite provinces to go to for food. And they do this beef noodle soup that is very standard in the beginning, and then most of its flavor comes from a very unique combination of flavors. That's very surprising, but when you try it, you're just like, oh my god, this makes so much sense. I personally call it like our local version of ramen because it uses a gravy, kind of like how in Japan you use a tare to give body and flavor to the soup. Here we're going to be using a gravy to give flavor and texture to the soup. So I'm using 2 types of beef here. I have some short rib and some beef brisket. The short rib still has some bones in it just to kind of give an extra depth to the broth. And then the brisket, I make sure to choose a nice fatty cut. We're also gonna be using some shrimp. We're just gonna take out the heads, keep all that beautiful gunk in there, and remove the shells. And the idea here is we're not actually gonna be using the bodies. We can use that somewhere else later. We're just gonna be using the heads to make a broth. For the brisket, nice big chunky cubes around 1 inch. And that goes straight into a pot with the short ribs and some boiling water. So same process as yours. This goes in for about 5 minutes to just kind of skim off the junk at the top. For our broth, we have our heads, which we're just gonna sear off until they kind of start developing a nice little flavor. Then we're gonna throw in some garlic unpeeled because I really like the flavor that garlic skin has. And that goes in with some onions, some black pepper, and some bay leaves, and then some rock salt. With some water, and that's gonna boil for about 30 minutes until it really gets nice and intense. Our beef, after a while, should be good to go, so I'm gonna discard that first batch of water. So this was really just to shock the beef really quickly. Then I'm actually gonna be using a pressure cooker. We don't have to. We can also do this stovetop in a pot. And that goes in with some brown onions, some garlic. I have some ginger as well, so very similar in terms of flavor profiles. And some rock salt, and some black pepper, and some bay leaves. So I'm gonna cover all of that with some water. And that's gonna go in the pressure cooker for about an hour and a half. An hour. So if you're doing stovetop, it translates to roughly about 2 hours. Now to build the gravy I was talking to you about a while ago, we chopped up some garlic, another brown onion, and then these are called hibe. So they're tiny little shrimp that are dried, they're sun-dried. They're extremely intense. They're very pungent, but bring so much depth of flavor to any dish that they're used in. And then we're gonna go ahead and strain our shrimp broth. Make sure to press it down to get all the flavor out of the heads. And then our beef should be done by now. So again, same thing. We're gonna go ahead and strain it. The beef should be extremely tender at this point, but still with a little bounce, which I think is important. But we're still gonna be, because we're gonna be basically chopping this up later. I'm using some egg noodles, which we're just gonna boil. So these are some fresh egg noodles. Chop up the beef. So you have all those like little pops of fat that I think really make the dish. Some spring onions, some calamansi, which are little green citruses we have in the Philippines that are really nice and bright, and some bruised red chilies. In a pan, so this is the unique part I was talking about, we're gonna be making like a quick gravy. So olive oil, some garlic, some onions go in there. Just a little bit of browning, get them nice and soft. We're gonna add in our dried shrimp, which we minced up. So by now your kitchen smells like dried shrimp. We're gonna take that out, keep all the bits in there. Put a bit of flour. I'm gonna make a little roux, a little flour and some butter, and then our shrimp stock. So I'm gonna wait for that to get nice and thick. Season it with some fish sauce, a little bit of pineapple vinegar for some nice balance, and then we're gonna throw back in our onions, our garlic, and our minced dried shrimp. So that's gonna be like our Japanese tare, basically our gravy. So if you've noticed, I didn't really season the soup of the beef. I didn't season the beef because all my flavor, I mean, obviously the beef will have given so much depth of flavor to that broth and that stock, but the seasoning and the saltiness will come from this gravy. So that gets spread on the bottom of the bowl. Then we're gonna add our noodles, our broth, chopped beef, and then our spring onions, and then a bit more gravy on top of the beef.
Wow, that looks amazing.
What was cool is that both recipes have some similarities, but ultimately they're very different. And this has kind of like your typical Filipino flavors.
Okay. Does it taste a little bit seafoody?
It does. It really does. It has It's very strange because since you don't get any saltiness from the beef broth because we added just a little pinch of rock salt, all your saltiness comes from the brininess of that shrimp, and it just at first it really doesn't make sense, but then when you try it all together you're like, oh wow, this is really good. And the first time I tried this was I was shooting in that region, and we went to a small roadside eatery where the tricycle drivers, our local tuk-tuks, were kind of eating at 5 in the morning, and they were all talking about this beef noodle soup called Kinalas, and I tried it. I was like, how have I never heard of this? Because it was so different from every other type of soup that we have. And so I thought this addition of a gravy was so unique and so different. And I've been making it ever since. Delicious.
Yeah, it looks great. I'll have to try it one day.
You think, what's the Angel Wong starter pack in terms of video recipes?
Oh my gosh, there's so many, but I would say two really famous dishes are classic Taiwanese 3-cup chicken, and we call it sanbeiji. It's very flavorful, the chicken is tender, delicious. There's also braised pork belly, and you guys probably have something similar to that. And then finally, my bubble tea recipes, because bubble tea wasn't invented in Taiwan. So if you guys like bubble tea, definitely check those recipes out.
Nice. All right, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.